I'll go first. I thought that beating your meat was a literal term, so I punched myself and wondered how anyone could find it pleasurable. Story 1. My grandmother told me that if I drank coffee, it would stunt my growth. I wanted to be 6 feet tall like my grandfather, so I never drank it. Now, at 61 years old, I am still hoping to have that growth spurt. I only have 3 inches to go. Story 2. I thought that Staten Island was an artificially created island made by dumping trash into the harbor, and then building houses on top. I'm still not completely convinced that this one was wrong. I also believed my parents when they told me that the pet rabbit in my preschool went to live on a farm after he suddenly disappeared one day. I found out when I was about 19 that he escaped and was attacked and eaten by cats a few blocks away from the preschool. Rest in peace, hop around. Story 3. I grew up in somewhat hippie communities where the children had eccentric names, while the parents had relatively normal names. Based on that, I concluded that you tend to receive a more conventional adult name as you grow older. Story 4. I always wondered why drinking and driving was so dangerous. There were billboards about it, ads on TV, and news reports. What made drinking and driving so dangerous? And why didn't they ever mention anything about eating and driving? Story 5. I am a European immigrant who started school not knowing English in the United States. I thought dirt pudding was real dirt and did not eat it for the next 6 years at school. Story 6. My British cousin used to visit me in the United States when we were kids. He confided in me years later, as adults, that as a child he had seen the soft drink dispensers in restaurants and convenience stores, and the strange way that waiters would keep filling his half-empty glass of cola. With soda drinks coming from dispensers and seemingly endless in supply, his child mind made a logical leap and concluded that soft drinks worked like water in America. They came from underground pipes. He imagined the underside of every American city riddled with a tangle of pipes for every soft drink flavor imaginable. Between the cities, he envisioned huge underground reservoirs and canals of fizzy beverages to supply the whole system. He even inspected our kitchen faucet for extra buttons or levers that might dispense Sprite or Dr. Pepper, concluding that the pipes must only lead to restaurants and gas stations, or that only very wealthy people had them available at home. The extra funny part was that he returned at the age of 20 for a semester abroad and found himself in a restaurant picturing the soft drink pipes, only to realize that it couldn't possibly work that way. Story 7. When I was in elementary school, I thought a deafening silence was when it gets so quiet that all you hear is the ringing in your ears. I later learned that I have had tinnitus my whole life. Story 8. Me. Why isn't the computer working? Dad, you need to boot it first, son. Me cries in broken toes. I work in information technology now, go figure. Story 9. I thought cheesecake had actual grated cheese in it. Put me off until I was in my late teens and discovered how wrong I was. Story 10. When I was little, I thought on sale meant for sale. We grew up living hand to mouth, so it was common to hear my mom mention that chicken, orange juice, and potatoes were on sale at the grocery store. To my understanding, that meant they were available for purchase at the store. Since we never bought anything at full price, it took me longer than it should have to realize that being on sale was a markdown, not just availability. Story 11. When I heard about people getting fired, I thought it meant they were taken out back and shot. I guess I must have confused it with people using the word fire to mean shoot. Story 12. Not exactly the question, but I used to think terrorist and tourist were the same word. So when someone said, that place is a tourist trap, I would be confused about how it stayed in business. Story 13. I thought Crayola was the Italian word for crayon because my Italian grandmother always referred to crayons by the brand name. Do you want a color? There are some Crayolas in the drawer. I even told the other kids at school that Crayola meant crayon in Italian. I can't remember exactly when I realized that wasn't true. Story 14. I used to think that saying thanks for nothing was polite when I asked for something that wasn't given. So whenever I was denied anything, I would smile and say, okay, then thanks for nothing. Story 15. If I swallow the seed of a watermelon or any fruit, it will grow inside my body, and I will become a tree. So every time I try to eat a watermelon, I use a fork or a knife to remove all the seeds before I eat it. I won't eat it until I find and remove all the seeds. Story 16. When I went to church with my parents, the vicar said, "Praise be to God." I thought God's first name was Peter. Praise Peter, God. Story 17. I thought if World Wrestling Entertainment wrestlers saw each other in real life outside of the ring, they would actually fight each other on sight. Story 18. At the beginning, when I heard Xbox 360, I thought previous versions, Xbox One to Xbox 359, had already been released. However, I quickly learned from my friends that this was incorrect. Story 19. I thought bisexual meant you had both parts. It was a long time before I found out it was a sexuality thing, not a gender thing. My friend in middle school told me his girlfriend said she was bisexual and asked me what it meant. And I was like, "You're going to have to get to know her better to understand." Story 20. I thought that dew formed in the morning by a thin sheet of water falling from the sky across the entire world at a time I was never awake to see. Story 21. When I was learning to read, I thought realty and reality were the same word. I was trying my best to understand what they were selling. I also thought the song Material Girl celebrated that we are all made of material and that we are not so different after all. Story 22. I thought that since all the old photos and TV shows were in black and white, the whole world was black and white. I asked my mom what it was like to see in color for the first time. Story 23. I thought every trophy cost $1 million. I have no idea where I got this idea. It wasn't a relative teasing me as far as I remember. I just came up with it and I was absolutely astonished when I saw people with multiple trophies. They must be millionaires. Story 24. As a child in the 1980s, there were many contests on television. I used to mishear void where prohibited as boy or girl prohibited, which confused me greatly. It was only in the last 10 years that I reflected on it and realized what was incorrect. Story 25. I used to think that a heavyset woman just had a lot of babies inside her. My mom was so embarrassed when I pointed to a woman at the grocery store and said to her, "She must have 10 babies inside her." Story 26. I overheard some people discussing euthanasia once, but I did not catch any specifics about what it was, just how bad they thought it was. I remember being unable to understand why euthanasia was considered such a negative topic. Story 27. My parents used to joke, "Go play on the railway tracks." One day I said I was going to play on the railway tracks, and my mom laughed. I came back an hour later, and she asked me where I had been. She was shocked when I told her I had been at the railway yard playing by the train tracks. Story 28. I thought when people were referred to as the late so-and-so, it meant they were just late and didn't make it in time to be on camera. I didn't realize it meant they were literally dead. Story 29. Pick up the pace. I kept looking for something to pick up and was too embarrassed to ask what the pace was. Story 30. I didn't know that sex involved physically engaging with another person until I saw it in adult films years after sex education. Ladies and gentlemen, American Public School. Story 31. I remember my dad telling me he got back from Miami for work. I had no idea what Miami was. I thought it was his own special place, and that one day I would have my own Miami to go to. Story 32. Being American, I didn't know what a count was. I thought it was a synonym for a vampire because I saw many vampires in fiction being referred to as counts. I didn't think counts actually existed. Story 33. My mother used to tell us that the sign "Watch for Falling Rock" was to remind us to look for the little Indian boy who got lost in the woods. We would always look up at the hills searching for him. Rest in peace, Mom. I will share this story with my grandkids. Story 34. I thought The Undertaker was actually from a place called Death Valley. I also believed that The Undertaker and Kane were actual brothers. Story 35. I thought that SUVs were Jeeps until I was about 8. I could not understand how an SUV was not a Jeep. I had no concept of brands. Story 36. When my dad used to say to his friends, "How's tricks?" I thought he was asking, "How's tricks?" as a short form for Trixie, and that he was inquiring about their wives. It was only after he had said it to about 3 people that I asked why all his friends' wives had the same name, and he explained it to me. Another instance was when my dad was discussing our ancestors in terms of genealogy, but I thought he was literally talking about a long-dead relative named Antecedents. I wondered where that strange name came from. Story 37. I got upset with my mom as a child for drinking her Diet Cola while driving after hearing a radio advertisement about drinking and driving. Story 38. For the life of me, I couldn't understand why people who spoke different languages couldn't understand me. I was literally saying what I meant. Dog means dog. How are you not getting this? It probably clicked sometime around late elementary school. I didn't grow up around other cultures. Story 39. I remember when I was 7 or 8, my dad would call unwise people fools. We also lived on a chicken farm. You can figure it out. Story 40. I was told that doing it would make me go blind. I thought they were lying. Now I'm wearing glasses. What a coincidence. Story 41. I thought you had to make a full rotation of your eyeballs in order to roll your eyes. I was confused about why such a tedious task was performed so often and so casually. Story 42. I was young and naive, but I believe Jack Frost was a real person who came to our house when it got cold. Story 43. Not a man, but I had to weigh in. I was 16 years old when I found out that having the dome light on while someone is driving isn't illegal. Story 44. I used to pick my nose a lot when I was little, which resulted in a few nosebleeds. I had to use paper to stop the bleeding, but the silly part was believing what my mom and grandmother said. They claimed that the red, slimy, long thing that came out when the bleeding stopped was a worm that lived inside my nose. They said it was harmless but would hurt my nose if I kept picking at it, which made it escape and caused me to bleed. I swore I always stared wide-eyed at the worm, and I stopped picking my nose for a while. Years later, I discovered that it was not a worm. It was just my nose covered in blood. Boy, I was foolish. Story 45. I thought don't drink and drive meant any kind of drink. I told my teacher my mom was drinking while driving, and she got called in. She was drinking diet soda. Story 46. I thought that Adidas, Nike, and Puma shoes made you fast. Then I got some and learned it wasn't the case. You had to be fast before you bought them. Story 47. Drinking Mountain Dew would cause negative effects on male reproductive health. I avoided drinking Mountain Dew for years because of this baseless rumor as a child. Story 48. I thought guys weren't allowed to go to a wedding shower because the bride and all her friends take a big shower together. I was embarrassingly old before I realized what it really meant. Story 49. I thought that when you moved, you had to find someone in the town you were moving to in order to trade houses with. Story 50. I don't know how I got this thought in my head, but when I was about 8 or 9, I had a fear that when I was having a really big bowel movement, I was actually pooping my brain out of my body. So while sitting there, I would do math problems in my head to prove to myself that I had not pooped my brain out. Story 51. When our car was stalling and we had a part replaced, they told me that they needed to install something. I figured that install means to stop something from stalling. Story 52. I am a lifelong resident of South Louisiana. We say, I'm going to visit when we mean, I'm going to pass by. As a child, I saw highway signs that said, do not pass, and thought we could not drive there. Story 53. You can just be yourself, and everything will work out. I found out quickly that this is not applicable if you are not good at it. Story 54. When I was very young, I believed that when people died in movies, they died in real life. Story 55. Quicksand. Always on the lookout for quicksand. I even went hunting for it from time to time. I would head out with my trusty 6-foot length of rope, with an adjustable wrench tied to the end to throw around a nearby tree to pull myself out, just in case. Safety first. Story 56. No one ever told me this, but in 4th grade history, when I found out Alaska was sold to the United States by Russia, I actually thought Russia cut off a piece of land and shipped it off to America. I just assumed that's what happened. Story 57. I thought the phrase, have a good night's sleep, was sarcastic, just like, don't let the bedbugs bite. It turns out I have severe sleep apnea and have never had a good night's sleep in my entire life. I believed everyone slept poorly and coped with jokes. Story 58. My grandfather once said something like cutting a piece from his behind and feeding it to him, which I now understand was a figurative way of expressing that he was frustrated. At the time, I genuinely believed my grandfather had cut a perfect square out of someone's behind and fed it to him because he was so angry, while I quietly enjoyed my snack. It remains a core memory for me, and I still remember it vividly. Story 59. My dad had a dry sense of humor and enjoyed telling jokes with a straight face. One time, my brother was playing with his belly button, and my dad told him to be careful because if the screw comes out, his butt would fall off. In all seriousness, he explained that the belly button resembles a screw because it is a very long one that goes all the way through and holds up the buttocks. We believed him at the time. Story 60. Not a guy, but I am being 100% truthful. When I was very little, like under 5, I thought cartoons were people in costumes acting out shows. I was always confused as to why I never saw these people in real life, but I just dealt with the confusion somehow, I guess. Story 61. Is it true or just an old wives' tale that we shouldn't take baths or showers when there's lightning outside? I think many of our mothers told us this. Story 62. When I was a kid, my dad told me a story about when I was still a baby. He was out in the ocean on his surfboard, just lying down and enjoying himself. His board bumped into a jetty while he was in the calm water nearby, causing him to fall off. He was treading water at first and happened to see a great white shark swimming under him. He said, "I made like Jesus and walked on water." I took this literally, not knowing who Jesus was, and assumed my dad could walk on water. One day, I told my friends that my dad could walk on water, and understandably, none of them believed me. To prove it, I took a group of friends to my dad's office. He was a faculty member at the school I attended, and asked him to share his surfing story. However, this time he omitted the crucial part. I reminded him, "And then you walked on water." He was dumbfounded, saying, "You said you made like Jesus and walked on water." My dad laughed heartily in front of my friends. He then had to explain to me that it was just a saying to mean he got himself to safety as quickly as he could. Story 63. At 12 years old, my 17-year-old brother was driving me. He was going 20 miles per hour, and I was frustrated that he wouldn't drive the speed limit. I felt I was much faster than the vehicle was moving, so I got out and raced him. He never drove more than 12 miles per hour, and I could not keep up. I refused to believe he didn't cheat. At 20 years old, I raced him again and lost miserably once more. I swear he cheated. Story 64. I used to think all dogs were male and all cats were female. If they mated, they would have dogs and cats as offspring. Story 65. Where I lived as a child, there were small clay hills, and I was puzzled by their strange brown and orange color. My aunt told me that's where they get Nesquik from, and I believed her. Story 66. In first grade, I was writing something and wanted to use the word "and." I was trying to decide if I should spell it as end or end, so I said it out loud. To me, it sounded like I was saying end, so I wrote end. I could not for the life of me figure out why I was supposed to use and when I said end. Story 67. Because of the phrase game of cat and mouse, I thought the two animals literally had a Tom and Jerry relationship in the wild where they just played tricks on each other. Story 68. I thought life used to be in black and white because of old photos and movies. It seemed obvious. Then one day I asked my mom when exactly life turned to color. Story 69. I thought that whatever the shampoo and conditioner claimed to do, it would actually work for my hair. For example, if I used products meant for curly hair, I expected my straight, fine hair to magically curl. Story 70. I fell for the classic misconception that all leaves are lettuce. This resulted in me eating some random tree leaves in front of friends the next day, possibly oak. Fortunately, I like ranch dressing with my salad, so I didn't eat much. Story 71. Nice. I'll raise you, oral sex. I thought it was an actual wind from the mouth or a series of puffs that made it what it is. So there I was, crouched over, literally blowing until I almost passed out, thinking the cooling sensation was the key. Story 72. I practiced my reading in the car by reading signs. I always saw left lane must turn left, and thought it referred to a place. But the word was actually lane. Story 73, just work on yourself. If you are good, people will recognize it, and you will get what you deserve. This is not a healthy belief to hold regarding your self-worth. Story 74. When a character dies, it is often referred to as meeting a sticky end. I believe the first time I encountered this phrase was when my parents were discussing Star Wars. They had shown me the original trilogy and the first two prequel movies, but since Revenge of the Sith has a 12 rating in the UK, I wasn't allowed to watch it. They gave me a summary and told me that Mace Windu met a sticky end, leading me to imagine he would die in some sort of slime trap that would kill him slowly. Fortunately, he ended up out of the scene. Story 75. My uncle was friends with two Asian brothers when I was a child, and he told me they were ninjas. I wholeheartedly believed him and argued fiercely with my mother, who said they were not. I held this belief throughout my childhood until I got old enough to realize Sook and Nook actually just worked at the grocery store. Disappointment. I also thought Richard Simmons was a woman. I remembered another one. When I was a kid, my mom convinced me that birds couldn't fly if you got salt on their tail feathers. Then she'd send me outside with a salt shaker so she could socialize with her friends inside while I chased birds for hours. Nice. Her boyfriend would take us snipe hunting. If you know. Story 76. I believe I set the expectations quite low. Do not talk to strangers. Avoid having anyone in my home when I am not there. Do not lie, and do not get arrested. No one has ever complained about my children playing with their children. Story 77. I saw a meme where it looked like a rapper was saying a particular offensive term multiple times while his hand was over his crotch. It was just a pose, but I figured this meant that term referred to a man's private parts. It didn't take me long to realize I was mistaken. Story 78. When I was very young, I heard a noise outside my bedroom window and asked my mother what it was. She replied that it was just a rustle. For years, I believed there was a strange creature called a Russell living outside our house. Story 79. There was wet paint on the wall, and an adult told me not to touch it because it does not wash off. Naturally, that meant it was permanent if I got any on me. Sure enough, I accidentally got some on my arm and cried for hours, thinking it was permanent. Story 80. My mom told me that baby cows came from those big circular hay bales. I believed that until I learned how babies were made. Story 81. I once saw a file labeled Dead Files on the counter of my school's office. I thought it contained information about students who had passed away. Story 82. For a long time, I didn't even know what a phrase or a saying was. I remember being in third grade and receiving a vocabulary worksheet on phrases and the parts of speech in those phrases. I thought those phrases were common sayings because I didn't know the difference. As a little undiagnosed autistic child looking to fit in, I carried that paper around for a week, searching for places to use those sayings in conversation. I'd be talking to one of my friends in the lunchroom, and they'd say, "Lunch was great yesterday, but it isn't as good today." I would respond, "Yeah, well, you know what they say." Then I would look at the paper and say, "Green car." Or when somebody fell down, I would say, "Well, you know what they say." Checking the paper, "Turkey dinner." They were literally the most random two words you could think of. If they were on the paper, my little brain thought they were very cool things to say. Story 83. My dad always used hugging and kissing as a euphemism for sex. Plus, that's basically what they did in the movies I saw. As a child, I literally thought sex meant kissing. Story 84. I didn't understand the difference between deaf and deaf. The words sounded the same, and I didn't know what deaf meant. So when I heard phrases like, "that person is deaf," or sign language for the deaf, I thought these people were actually dead, and that there was a special language to communicate with deceased individuals. Story 85. My brother had told me that the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park were actually robots. He meant that robotic props were used in filming. My young mind, unable to fully comprehend the plot of the movie, never understood why they were so remarkable in the first place, considering they were only robots and not living dinosaurs, and why they couldn't simply be turned off. Also, after watching Homeward Bound many times at a young age, I subconsciously assumed that animals communicated with each other telepathically in English. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s, daydreaming about it, that I realized this didn't make any sense. Story 86. I thought tenderizing meat was something you had to do after returning from the butcher to make it more flavorful. That's at least what Alice used to say. Sam, the butcher, would always tenderize his meat. Story 87. I thought when my parents told me my dad had to go to work to make money that he actually physically made the money. Story 88. I asked my mom why we were donating clothes to the Salvation Army. After some confusion about impoverished individuals in other countries, I concluded that the Salvation Army was an organization supporting poor orphan children who could only survive in war-torn countries in Africa. Everyone felt sympathy for these child soldiers, so we donated shoes and clothing to them. My mother often agreed with me when she wasn't fully listening and just wanted me to stop asking questions. So she confirmed that my understanding of the situation was correct. Story 89. It was only in my late 20s when our mother came clean with my brother and me and confessed that she didn't actually perform in the circus with her act of flipping pancakes, although she was really good at it. Story 90. My brother was upset with someone and said he was going to reprimand them. For a long time, I thought it was an actual law and that my brother was going to educate this person on it by reading its text to them. Story 91. When I heard the term, crooked cop, I thought it referred to a gay police officer because they weren't heterosexual. I also thought the grocery store near my house that sold food and drugs meant they sold illegal substances. Story 92. I heard my parents and their siblings talking about adult topics. In their conversation about a friend, they said, "He should have never gotten behind the wheel." You know how that wording goes. I was trying to figure out why they would want to get behind the wheel of a car in the first place. I thought, what does sitting behind the wheel have to do with driving? I didn't understand it until years later. Story 93. I thought math was useless. I was one of those kids who complained about math class and said it was unnecessary. I believed I would never use math. 3 college degrees later, I wholeheartedly disagree with my younger self. I could write extensively about the importance of arithmetic and how we use it in everything in our lives, from simple to complex tasks. We even use it without realizing it. Arithmetic is fundamental to everyday life, and I have deep gratitude and appreciation for pioneers like Pythagoras and Euclid. If I could talk to my younger self, I would educate and even lecture them on the importance and necessity of mathematics. Story 94. Ouch. That's a hard thing to take literally, unless you're a culinary artist. Then tenderize that meat, my friend. Story 95. I have 2 thoughts that come to mind. The first is that for the longest time, I believed crabs could crawl up toilet drains and that there was a risk of being pinched by them while sitting on the toilet. Looking back, I think I may have overheard some adults talking about how you could get crabs from toilet seats. Secondly, I was extremely afraid of being abducted by aliens as a child. I couldn't even watch the movie E.T. because I was so frightened. One day, my uncle told me that aliens can read minds and will only abduct you if you are thinking about them. I spent years trying not to think about aliens while I was trying to fall asleep. Story 96. When I was a child, we would visit the temple, the Hindu equivalent of a church, where we would donate money similar to a tithe. My parents told me this money was being donated to God. As a child, I believed they collected the money and burned it all to send it to God. If they had explained that the money was for the people who ran the temple, it wouldn't have seemed as interesting. Story 97. I was sucking on a Sonic the Hedgehog toy of Dr. Robotnik, and they were hand-painted. My older brother said, "Stop, that's poisonous. If you put that in your mouth, you can never eat again, or you will die." I was maybe 6 at the time, and I actually believed him. I didn't eat for 2 weeks. My parents took me to a psychologist who walked me to the vending machine as if my parents hadn't already tried that. They eventually eased me into Ensure formula because it was a liquid food, and I fell for it. That eventually led me back to normalcy. Story 98. So near where I lived, there was a street called Newton Drive that I would pass by when I was in the car with my parents. I had never seen Drive abbreviated as DR because DR meant doctor, right? For a few years, I thought that the street was literally for one person named Dr. Newton. Story 99. You played yourself. Hold my wine cooler. I used to think you could slide down the stairs into your clothes laid out like in cartoons. Story 100. In preschool, I thought the alphabet went H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, and I believed a lemino was just some kind of filler people said between K and P. Story 101. I was watching television alone when Smokey Bear came on and told me that only I can prevent forest fires. I understood. Later, while I was with my parents, a news report aired about a massive forest fire affecting California. I started crying and told my parents that they needed to call the number and report me. Story 102. In the song, I'm Awesome, he said, I will run away from a brawl. Being from the South, that's how we pronounce brawl. I thought he was saying, I will run away from a bra, and I figured he was scared of women. Story 103. In France, we call a banana bunch a régime de banane, which can be translated to banana diet. When I was young, I thought this term was for people who ate only bananas like stereotypical monkeys. Story 104. On a camping trip, my uncle had to go to the bathroom, and my aunt asked, will you go for me too? I thought that couples helping each other with such tasks was a benefit of marriage. Story 105. It's a good thing you didn't grow up where choke the chicken or spank the bishop were popular phrases. Story 106. When I was a kid, my dad always told me before he left the house not to take any wooden nickels. I always thought, why would I take a wooden nickel? I think it means not to do anything stupid. Story 107. I thought the prohibition against drinking and driving meant you could not have any beverages in a vehicle. Story 108. I remember when I was 12, the substitute teacher said that if I walked a mile in someone's shoes, I might understand why he was acting the way he was. She sent me to the principal's office, thinking that my response, why would I? They wouldn't fit, he's way bigger than me, was me being disrespectful to her. Story 109. When I was growing up, my family knew I was going to be tall because my dad and mom were very tall. People used to say that girls would be all over me because of my height, and I believed it. Now, at 17 years old and 6 feet 5 inches, I am still growing. I've discovered that girls tend to prefer guys who are between 6 feet and 6 feet 2 inches tall. Anything over that seems too tall for them. Story 110. My dad said, if I die or have a heart attack tomorrow, it will be your fault. After he screamed at me for not understanding something. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.